of. I now recognize myself for the purpose of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Today we convene to review the fiscal 2024 budget request for Federal Maritime Transportation Program administered by Maritime Administration and Federal Maritime Commission and NOAA. I'd like to welcome our guests, Rear Admiral Ann Phillips, Administrator of the Maritime Administration, and the Honorable Dan Maffei, Chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission. MARAD serves as the agency within the Department of Transportation responsible for promoting the U.S. merchant marine and the domestic maritime industry. In this pursuit, they are responsible for administration of programs that serve to strengthen national security and ensure a more efficient maritime transportation system. This subcommittee shares jurisdiction of MARAD with House and Armed Services Committee, which oversees the non-national security aspects of the merchant marine. This includes Port Infrastructure Development Program, known as PIDP, that provides grants in coastal seaports, inland river ports, and Great Lakes ports infrastructure to improve the safety, efficiency, and reliability of the movement of goods. The President's budget request for fiscal year 24 includes $230 million for this program, which is in addition to the $450 million in advance appropriations the program received through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Through this program is intended to help optimize and improve port operations. I am concerned with the program's ability to fully realize this goal due to language Congress has routinely included in the program's authorization that prohibits the use of funds for automated cargo handling equipment. I am concerned that MARAD has included this policy in this notice of funding opportunity for the United States Marine Highway Grant Program, which has no legislative requirement specifying this prohibition. It is unfortunate that we have drastically limited the impact of these programs and have, due to this policy, I look forward to hearing from MARAD on the role automation plays in improving port operations for our nation's supply chains. Additionally, MARAD oversees the permitting process for deep water ports, its sole permitting program. Current applications have experienced very long delays in the processing of applications, and in fact, all 5 pending applications are stalled due to MARAD's convoluted process. I hope we can work with MARAD to ensure that these applications are processed in a timely fashion and as is directed under law. We also have FMC with us today to discuss the work being done to implement provisions of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022, known as OSRA. FMC is an independent agency responsible for regulation of ocean-borne transportation in the foreign commerce of the United States. The supply chain crisis that emerged following the onset of COVID-19 pandemic led to massive increases in ocean shipping costs, long cargo wait times at the port, and imbalance in maritime trade flow, leading to the frequent export of empty containers from the U.S. rather than moving inland to be filled with domestic produced products and goods. Congress, in response, passed the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022 to help address many of these challenges facing U.S. exporters. I applaud FMC for working expeditiously to implement the many provisions included in law, unlike the United States Coast Guard that often fails to carry out the legislative directives of this subcommittee. I look forward to hearing from Chairman Mayfay today from FMC's progress in implementing OSRA. Lastly, I would like to note that though they are not here in person, we also received written testimony from NOAA regarding their marine debris programs. NOAA is responsible for providing support to oil spill response and marine debris prevention, removal, research, response coordination, monitoring, and detection. I thank NOAA for providing us with their written testimony, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. I look forward to hearing from their testimony. I ask unanimous consent that members not on the committee be allowed to participate in the hearing. Without objection, show that adopted. I now recognize Ranking Member Carbajal for an opening statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to yield to Ranking Member Larson. He has somewhere to go, and it's the Ranking Member, if that's okay.
Okay, that recognition is accepted, and Mr. Larson, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the Ranking Member for indulging me. I want to thank you for scheduling this hearing for the fiscal year 24 budget requests of MARAD and the FMC. The first in a series this committee will hold to inform us on maritime issues. The MARAD's purpose is to promote the U.S. maritime industry while the FMC protects consumers and monitors shipping company practices. Ocean shipping is dominated by foreign shipping companies with U.S. flagged operations comprising less than 2% of imports and exports. The supply chain crisis and ongoing international conflicts demonstrate the need for a robust U.S. maritime presence. The President's fiscal year 24 budget request for MARAD includes a 2% increase and a 14% increase for FMC, both welcomed increases. Under MARAD, this year's budget request includes an increase for the United States Merchant Marine Academy to address long-term infrastructure needs and culture changes around sexual assault and sexual harassment. Investment in the U.S. maritime industry is long overdue, and for years we've faced a mariner shortage as the incumbent workforce ages out and industry struggles to appeal to younger Americans. Admiral Phillips, I do expect to hear how MARAD is promoting the industry and getting ahead of this particular growing issue. I'd be remiss if I did not bring up the work of Admiral Phillips and Deputy Administrator Leslie, the work they've done to address sexual assault and harassment both at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and across the commercial industry. Sexual assault and harassment have no place in our society, and every mariner deserves respect and deserves to feel safe at sea. The industry will not grow if workers do not feel safe and welcome. The President's budget includes increases for MARAD's Marine Highway Program and the Port Infrastructure Development Program as well. Infrastructure investments in U.S. seaports and their intermodal connections, both on the land and in the water, provide opportunities to bolster our economy, create and sustain jobs, and enhance our international competitiveness. Strong and sustainable federal investment in seaport-related infrastructure is critical to the economic and environmental health of the United States. Small shipyards are vital to maintaining an industrial shipbuilding base as well and a U.S. maritime presence while providing rewarding jobs to local communities. As technology evolves and industry invests in the development of alternative fuels, programs like the Small Shipyard Grant Program will be essential in ensuring our shipyards can bring these new fuels and technology online. And despite an increase in authorized amounts, I am very disappointed the President's budget includes only $20 million for this program, which is the same as last year's budget request. Last Congress, we passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, which included $2.25 billion over 5 years for the Port Infrastructure Development Program, the largest investments since the launch of that important initiative. These grants will bring U.S. ports into the 21st century and provide needed funds to reduce emissions and strengthen the supply chain. Since 2019, over $6 billion have been requested by applicants for these grants, demonstrating the demand for them. Between 2010 and 2019, China invested billions in domestic and foreign ports to broaden its global maritime influence. Economic and national security relies on a maritime power. The government of China understands this, and it's time that we do too. Small ports are part of the lifelines to our local communities and are a critical part of the supply chain that can ease congestion at our large ports. That is why it's so important that we get robust funding in the PIDP. I want to commend Admiral Phillips and MARAD for their work on the BIL funding and look forward to seeing what projects are selected this fall. Last Congress, this committee passed the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022, and under Chairman Maffei's leadership, the FMC has been quick to implement new requirements for ocean carriers and to investigate unfair shipping practices. FMC will require more funding and personnel to fully address the new investigative and prosecutive authorities that we provided it under law. I'm heartened to see the President understands this and included in the budget request a 14% increase for FMC. Since the passage of OSRA 2022, container prices have fallen, ships lingering offshore have dropped 30%, and FMC has improved the reporting process, leading to an increase in charge complaints from American businesses, one of which resulted in a $2 million settlement over findings that the shipping company knowingly and willfully violated the Shipping Act. These actions are important. Finally, I'll just say the committee has jurisdiction over the marine debris program at NOAA. Through this program, NOAA determines the sources of, reduces, prevents, and removes marine debris from our oceans and to mitigate their impact on marine environment and navigation safety. This is a critical program for the Pacific Northwest, for the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea. I look forward to reauthorizing that as well. With that, thank the Chair and the Ranking Member for the indulgence. I'll be back for questions, and I don't yield at any time back because I have none to yield back. Thank you.
Okay, well, Mr. Carvajal, you want to go ahead with your...
I'm glad to go, but I want to yield to your Republican and as on your side as the next member. I don't want to take advantage. So since you let my ranking member go, I'm okay with your Republican, the next Republican.
We only do opening statements for chairman and ranking members.
So I could go next? Okay, great. Thank you. I just want to do what's right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for scheduling today's hearing on the review of fiscal year 2024 administration budget, request for federal maritime transportation programs, and implementation of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. Well, that was a mouthful. And I want to congratulate you, Mr. Chairman, on being appointed chairman of the subcommittee. Look forward to working with you and finding as much common ground on a bipartisan basis as possible. I look forward to hearing from Chair Maffei of the Federal Maritime Commission, or FMC, and Administrator Phillips of the Maritime Administration, or MARAD as we call it, on the President's budget request and their agency's priorities for the upcoming year. I'm particularly eager to hear from the FMC about its implementation of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which passed out of this subcommittee last Congress before becoming law, and how its new authorities will help maintain a resilient and efficient supply chain. I want to remind us it passed in a bipartisan fashion. As the federal agency tasked with ensuring fairness in international shipping, the FMC has key authorities which allow it to safeguard transparent and equitable maritime commerce. As the recent supply chain issues have demonstrated, stability in international shipping is integral to a strong economy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, weaknesses in our supply chain system were amplified as landside port congestion and unfair shipping practices by foreign ocean carriers led to backlogs and price increases, which certainly contributed to inflation. The reforms in our bill strengthen the FMC's authority to investigate unfair ocean shipping carrier fees and facilitate the efficient movement of cargo through U.S. ports. I'm proud to say that since the passage of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, vessel congestion at ports has decreased dramatically, and the FMC has refunded over $700,000 in undue charges by carriers, or should I say unfair charges. Further, the FMC is currently undertaking a rulemaking aimed at ensuring that exporters are given fair access to cargo space. It is important that the FMC is sufficiently funded so that it can properly carry out these reforms, which will greatly benefit American businesses and the American consumer. I look also forward to learning about MARAD's plans to revitalize the American maritime industry, from ports and infrastructure to shrinking U.S. flagged fleet to the dwindling of available American merchant mariners. Administrator Phillips and her team have done an excellent job continuing to pursue systemic change to the toxic culture that has resulted in sexual violence at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and in the commercial maritime industry. Some of that congratulations is extended to also Lucinda Leslie for her work before the administrator came on. This issue is of the utmost importance, and while our work is not done, I commend both of your leaderships on efforts to make the maritime industry a safe and desirable workplace for all. Merit oversees vital grant programs that fund projects to modernize our infrastructure, including the Maritime Environmental and Technical Assistance Program, META, and the Port Infrastructure Development Program. The President's budget request includes $8.5 million for META, which is a $2.5 million increase over last year's budget. This supports the research, development, installation, and use of low-zero carbon technologies. These technologies are crucial for reducing harmful emissions that protect the environment, especially for port communities where air pollution is statistically worse. Included in this request for META is $1.5 million for the research and reduction of underwater noise, sound from vessels. Underwater noise disproportionately affects marine mammals, such as the whales. Last Congress, I worked with my colleagues across the aisle to include an increased authorization for META and language to address vessel sound. While this request is small, I am happy to see that Merit is prioritizing protecting whales from impact of vessels. The Port Infrastructure Development Program also supports decarbonization projects, which help reduce carbon footprint and build a more resilient, reliable marine transportation system. When we invest in renewable energy like electrification at ports, it creates jobs and adds resilience to disruptions that can occur with traditional fossil fuels, not to mention protecting the public's health. I'm particularly interested in how the Ports Infrastructure Development Program could support the Morro Bay offshore wind project in my district, building out potential port infrastructure to receive and transmit this energy, as well as creating laydown space for shoreside wind turbine staging and operations, is of critical importance that will require a significant investment. Thank you to our witnesses and attendees for their participation today. I look forward to a robust discussion about how the 2024 budget request can support investments in a stronger maritime industry. Mr. Chair, I yield back. That was a mouthful.
I'd like to welcome our presenters, witnesses, and thank them for being here today. Appreciate your attendance. Unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, show that ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the committee also asks you to limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Admiral Phillips, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Webster. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Carbajal, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your tremendous support for the Maritime Administration, the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, and the U.S. maritime industry. And thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. As a retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral with more than 30 years of military service, I knew before becoming the Maritime Administrator how critical our merchant marine and our entire maritime industry are to our national defense as well as our economy. Now, having led the great MARAD team for just under a year, I can tell you this agency is meeting many historic moments as we work to promote the merchant marine and strengthen all facets of the maritime industry. We are administering once-in-a-generation investments in ports and waterways made possible by the President's bipartisan infrastructure law. We are also working to advance culture change throughout the merchant marine to help ensure every mariner is treated with respect and has the opportunity to advance on the basis of their skills and professionalism. We're advancing long overdue recapitalization of our aging ready reserve force. The President's fiscal year 2024 budget request of $980.2 million for MARAD is critical to enabling MARAD to carry out this vital work on every front. For example, the request would expand our historic investments in ports. In fiscal year 2024, the third tranche of funding, $450 million, provided by the bipartisan infrastructure law to support the Port Infrastructure Development Program, will be invested in new grants. The President's budget requests an additional $230 million to support PIDP, which would bring the total amount of funding available in 2024 to $680 million. Last year, MARAD awarded more than $703 million in PIDP grants to 41 projects in 22 states and 1 territory. More than 60% of these awards benefit ports in historically disadvantaged communities, and more than $150 million in awarded funding focuses on port electrification to improve air quality. In addition, the President's fiscal year 2024 request will enable MARAD to continue to address the urgent and long-standing challenges at the Merchant Marine Academy, including implementing the many new authorities and responsibilities provided in the fiscal year 23 NDAA. Specifically, funding will support approximately 975 midshipmen and 292 faculty and staff. It will enable us to continue our work implementing the Every Mariner Builds a Respectful Culture program, EMBARC, and help meet the Academy's extensive facility maintenance and repair needs. As you know, MARAD established the EMBARC program in December of 2021 to help prevent sexual assault and harassment during the Sea-Year program, to support survivors, strengthen a culture of accountability, and improve safety for all mariners. Now, thanks to the FY23 NDAA, commercially operated vessels must, by law, comply with sexual assault and harassment prevention and response standards set by MARAD before they can train Merchant Marine Academy cadets. Further, the FY23 NDAA gave MARAD the authority to withhold payments from companies that receive federal subsidies if they do not comply with MARAD's policies and requirements. MARAD is working as quickly as possible to develop a proposed EMBARC rule pursuant to the authority provided by the NDAA. I note that today there are 16 commercial operators enrolled in EMBARC, and together they operate more than 140 vessels. The 2024 budget request also includes $92 million for capital and maintenance funding improvements for the Academy to help us advance capital projects and address the maintenance backlog. We have also implemented numerous measures to improve our ability to manage capital projects at the Academy, including creating a new position staffed by a senior executive to oversee all projects. Late last year, we provided the Academy's fiscal year 2022 capital improvement plan, which details project needs to support safety, health, and well-being of midshipmen. In December 2022, we awarded a campus-wide maintenance contract at USMMA, which has a $42 million ceiling over the next 5 years. And additional maintenance work, including the replacement of boilers, will continue outside that contract. Looking at our Sealift programs, the FY 2024 budget request, the full authorization of $318 million for the Maritime Security Program, and the budget requests $60 million for the Tanker Security Program. I'm pleased to report that at the end of last year, MARAD issued an interim final rule to implement the Tanker Security Program. The TSP application period closed February 17th, and we anticipate announcing the first 10 ships selected for enrollment in the near term. Thank you for the opportunity to present and discuss the President's budget for MARAD, and I look forward to any questions you and the members of the subcommittee may have.
Thanks so much. Now, Chairman Maffei, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Carbajal, and members of this committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. The last time I appeared before this subcommittee, the international ocean freight transportation system in this country was in crisis. Chairman Webster already pointed out to you the sky-high rates and the fact that ag exporters were being crowded out. And many of you were rightfully looking to the Federal Maritime Commission to take a leading role in untying the knots and mitigating the unfairness that seemed to be plaguing the supply chain. I am pleased to report to you today that the situation has dramatically improved. The ship queues and congestion that overwhelmed the supply chain for approximately 2 years are now gone. Cargo is flowing more fluidly, shippers are having an easier time securing vital equipment, and exports are better able to make their connections to outgoing ships. The cost of ocean shipping has fallen substantially, and for Trans-Pacific service is now near pre-pandemic levels. And this rate drop occurred far more rapidly than forecast. If anything, ocean shipping is now exerting downward pressure on price inflation. Now, no doubt, much of this is a natural result of market forces occurring as the world emerged from COVID. But the Federal Maritime Commission has also played a vital role in promoting fairness to America's importers and exporters and restoring confidence to our ocean supply chains. The intense engagement of the FMC has helped U.S. companies by providing fair arbitration or adjudication of their disputes with ocean container ship companies and terminal operators. Word gets around fast in the freight transportation industry. When America's importers and exporters realized that the FMC could help, there was a huge jump in cases. Our Consumer Affairs Office now handles an average of more than 100 requests for help every month. The FMC is now handling vastly more formal complaints than in past years. The annual number of dockets filed with our Secretary has tripled since 2019, We currently have more than 24 active cases, and there's been such a vast increase in cases filed with the Commission's administrative law judges that we now must hire a third judge when just one ALJ was sufficient in early 2020. Now, the FMC's increased potency in assisting American cargo shippers is largely due to the enactment by this subcommittee and then consequently by the whole Congress of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. This was the first substantial overhaul of America's international ocean shipping laws in 24 years, and in my view is a counterexample to the cynical view that Congress cannot address problems in a broadly bipartisan way and do so expediently. And I have to note that the two sponsors, House sponsors of the bill, Mr. Garamendi and Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, are here today. As you in Congress did your job, we at the FMC must now do our jobs by implementing the new law to the best of our ability and in the spirit intended by Congress. We have, in fact, made substantial progress in meeting our obligations under the law since the President signed it. The FMC has already 2 landmark OSRA rulings underway. OSRA rulemakings underway. We've created a new fast-track process for importer and exporter charge complaints, and we've implemented 7 other OSRA provisions. Now, the Commission is cognizant that it's implementing these important changes at a time when international trade itself is changing. At an ocean freight conference a few weeks ago, General David Petraeus warned that we are in an era of globalization, where geopolitics very much define what's possible in terms of economics, trade, and investment. Managing risk is becoming much more challenging for American importers and exporters when any event or economic issue taking place anywhere in the world has the potential to disrupt America's supply chains. America's international ocean freight transportation system moves more than $1.3 trillion in goods annually and is indirectly responsible for trillions more in economic activity. But make no mistake, this system remains vulnerable. The FMC has learned much from the last several years and is working diligently within our statutory authority to apply these lessons, both in our implementation of OSRA and in our other activities. The budget that the President has submitted permits us to do this, in large part by hiring the professional staff needed to enhance enforcement, sharpen antitrust monitoring, assist more U.S. importers and exporters, and work with public and private sector stakeholders to find solutions to America's supply chain challenges. This has been and continues to be the most intense period of activity in our agency's over 50-year history. We are proud of what we have accomplished, and at the same time, we understand that there is still so much to be done. Thank you. And I too am happy to take questions from the committee.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well, we'll start with our questioning. I'll be first. And Admiral Phillips, planned deepwater ports in the Gulf of Mexico are experiencing very long delays in their permitting process, and not real sure why that's happening, but they received that from Merit, and it's just not going. The permitting process outlined in Deepwater Port Act in 1974 specifies that process from application to issuance of a decision by the Secretary of Transportation should take no longer than 1 year, 365 days. However, several current pending applications are initially submitted several years ago and have been delayed by excessive requests from Merit for supplemental technical and environmental information, suspending the statutory process timeline. Applicants also report a lack of communication and transparency from Merit on where the process stands and what they can see to provide the needed information. First of all, why is Merit failing in the process these applications in a timely manner as outlined by law? And when is the decision expected for the Texas Gulf Link permit, which is now languishing for nearly 1,200 days? And anyway, maybe I'll continue on, and then you can come back and answer those 2 questions, okay? I'd like to shift now to discuss the Port Infrastructure Development Program. Current law provides funds for this program to be used for fully automated cargo handling equipment. A greater amount of cargoes enters in the ports. Many of the ports and terminal operators are working to optimize and improve operations, including technology and automated systems that have the potential to improve container throughput. At the same time, longshore unions have requested a transition to these new technologies. What role does the automated plan in improving the optimizing of capacity to move cargo through the ports? Additionally, why did MERIT include the prohibition of using funds to procure fully automated cargo handling equipment in the notice for funding opportunity for the United States Marine Highway Grant? Program when it is not directed by the legislation. And then lastly, I'd like to address a topic that has been subject of recent news reports. A recent Washington Post article highlighted the potential cybersecurity threat that Chinese manufactured cranes pose to our national security, serving as intelligence gathering devices capable of tracking and movement of goods at the ports. Section 3529 of the most recent NDAA directed MERIT to lead a report on this topic. Are there any early findings from the study or general highlights on the topic that you'd like to share? If you could talk about those, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with the cranes first. First of all, as you point out, we are tasked within the 2023 NDAA to do a report, an unclassified report on the topic of cyber threat, potential cyber threat related to cranes, particularly those that are manufactured in China. We are to do that report in concert with a number of interagency partners, CISA, Coast Guard, DHS, and others, and we are doing so. We have just begun meeting with all of them, and I would comment that much of the existing reporting and information on this particular problem is classified, and so those reports and those meetings are taking place in a classified environment. So we will continue to produce and work towards producing this report as directed by the NDAA. I think at present our findings are that much more work needs to be done, and consistent with that, certainly you're aware of the broader challenges with anything that is connected to the internet and that is cyber. Sir, if I may move to U.S. Marine Highways and automation, we are under law by the 2023 NDAA required under the PIDP program to report to Congress any aspect of a PIDP application grant that results in a net loss of jobs. And we added that notification, which is included in the PIDP NOFO, to the U.S. Marine Highways NOFO as well to make them consistent with what we believe to be Congress's intent there. If I may continue, sir, on deepwater ports, I realize I have used up my time. We anticipate we will be able to move forward with a record of decision on the Gulf Link project later this year. On the topic of the length of time it takes to implement and execute a deepwater port process to get to a legally defensible record of decision, we find that these are extremely complicated circumstances, and as under the law, we have the authority to put a stop clock on the process if we find that there is missing information from either the applicant or a special request by agencies, and we work with more than 20 federal agencies in completing this process. We do that, we put a stop clock in place to allow applicants to respond. I would take issue with the inference that we do not communicate with applicants. We communicate routinely with applicants, and I would reference in particular the completion of the spot record of decision last November. Prior to completing that record of decision for that particular application, we were meeting weekly with that applicant. So we do interact with applicants on a continued basis. I would also point out that the longest pending application is on hold more than 1,000 days at the request of the applicant. So in my opinion, it is to the applicant's benefit that we have this opportunity to stop the clock to allow them to refine their application so that we can move forward scrupulously following the law and with the obligation and intent of a legally defensible record of decision so that we can move forward.
Okay, well, my time has expired, so I'll go to Mr. Carbajal. You have questions, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, your time's never expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Phillips, I'm proud to have played a role in the passage of the sweeping legislation included in the NDAA last year addressing sexual assault and sexual harassment in the commercial maritime industry, as well as the Merchant Marine Academy. But I recognize that your work, and likely our work, is not done. I've heard repeated concerns about trouble recruiting and retaining commercial mariners. While we examine other ways to attract more individuals to the industry, how important is it that the industry becomes safer and more inclusive? And are you facing difficulty recruiting students to the academy?
Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Carbajal. I would say, in the context of recruiting, we are finding the same challenges that many other institutions are finding. Applications dipped last year. They are some better this year. And we are finding that we are indeed able to recruit students, and yet still are facing challenges, as are other academic institutions. I wouldn't draw any particular conclusions there. However, moving forward to the issue of safety and security within the maritime industry, it is absolutely paramount that, as you point out, we continue this journey. We are at the beginning of a journey, not the end, and we thank the committee for its support by putting Embark into law, and have continued to take and have taken significant steps at the Academy to strengthen both their sexual assault prevention and response programs, to ensure that midshipmen understand what their rights and requirements are at sea. We've issued them satellite cell phones. As you know, they're voice activated. They can contact anyone at any time if they feel they must for any reason. We have ensured that there is an amnesty policy, so people may come forward without fear of any other application being held against them in particular. And I can also say that we have taken the time to explain the legislation with the Coast Guard and others at the Academy, which in a session we held January 23rd with midshipmen, and later that afternoon with the entire Embark certified community. So as you suggest, this is the beginning of a journey. It is not the end. There is much more to be done, and we continue to move forward, and we will continue to move forward, and thank the committee.
Are companies complying with the new program? Are they still signing up? Is there still momentum there?
As I stated in my opening testimony, sir, thank you again for that question. The 16 operators and companies who are required by law to be in the Embark program are in the Embark program.
Thank you.
That includes more than 140 vessels.
Thank you very much. Admiral Phillips, we know the impact that the Port Infrastructure Development Program will have in reducing emissions in and around the ports, as well as providing low and no emission fuels to vessels. There needs to be a new development and infrastructure of landside facilities, like the Morro Bay project in my district, if we are to meet President Biden's 2030 decarbonization goals. What is the potential impact of PIDP-funded projects on offshore wind deployment?
Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Carbajal. Sir, as you may be aware, in last year's BIDP grant awards, there were at least 4 projects that were related to offshore wind deployment, totaling almost $100 million in grant responses. We expect more applicants this year will be tied to offshore wind development, and we look forward to reviewing those applications and helping to move them forward. There is certainly considerable potential within PIDP to facilitate additional capacity in supporting offshore wind.
Thank you. Chairman Maffei, among other things, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act tasked you with several difficult rulemakings. Can you report on the progress of those rulemakings, including the unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate rulemaking? Are you confident that they are going to result in a more equitable and transparent maritime supply chain? In response to heightened federal attention, as well as passage of OSRA, have carriers taken action to ensure a level playing ground for U.S. exporters?
Yeah, so just in general, I think the two, we've done a number of rulemakings in line with OSRA, but the 2 major ones that I call landmark rulemakings are the one to refine our detention and demurrage billing rules to take the precedent already set by the Commissioner Rebecca Dye authored interpretive rule and apply that and basically put more leaves on that tree. That one is, we're working now on the final rule for that. Where Where it has gone a little slower than I wanted was in this refusal to deal rulemaking. The reason for that, though, is not a bad reason. It's because we've gotten so many comments from 27 entities, lots of whom had very, very good points. The issue here is we're trying to maximize the benefits for U.S. exporters while minimizing any unintended consequences that then might harm them. So I would say that that is about the trickiest rulemaking we've ever done, but I think we're making very good progress. I will say that it's not going to be as narrow as just looking at the so-called refusal to deal provision, because I believe the intent of Congress was to look at also the provision that does not allow carriers to unreasonably refuse to take exports, which is in a slightly different part of the bill, but I view just as important. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm out of time. I yield back.
I think I answered, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Gonzalez Colon, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
back in the ports in Puerto Rico. The thanks God is already been solved. I just want to take the opportunity to make a point that MARAD and the U.S. flag fleet has been an important partners for Puerto Rico and in support of Puerto Rico for the regular service of our Jones Act carriers provide stability and reliability to Puerto Rico supply chain, both for consumers and for industry. And the U.S. domestic shipping fleet is a vital asset for our nation, but is our main source of goods on the island. So I'm proud that I say that I support this industry and I will continue to do so. I got a question for Admiral Phillips. And it's an issue we saw during the last weeks in Puerto Rico, and I want to bring the issue of security within our maritime transportation system. Last week, U.S. Customs and the Coast Guard at the Port of San Juan detained 18 illegal migrants who had stowed away aboard a container barge arriving from Jacksonville, Florida. As the vessel approached San Juan, 16 of those people jumped and attempted to swim ashore, and they were rescued by the Coast Guard at the time. Then when custom agents searched the barge, they found the remaining 2 migrants and 25 pounds of cocaine and a firearm. Custom officials told the press that they suspect the migrants scrambled aboard as the vessel passed waters of the Dominican Republic on its way to Puerto Rico. While the investigation is ongoing to determine exactly what happens, it raised questions about vulnerabilities and security risk if 18 people were able to jump on board of a barge traveling between 2 U.S. ports, supposedly undetected. So my question will be how the U.S. Maritime Administration works or coordinate with law enforcement partners and private sector stakeholders to address or mitigate security issues within our maritime transportation system, and how this fiscal year budget requests may help support those efforts.
So thank you, Congresswoman Gonzalez-Colon. It's very nice to meet you, ma'am. I am not aware of the situation you are describing, and I find it alarming. What MARAD would do in such a circumstance, knowing that the Coast Guard has been involved and Customs has already been involved, is ascertain the details and more than likely put out, which we do routinely, a notice to our fleet, to our U.S. flag fleet, through our security, our very modest security department, to ensure that our carriers are aware of this circumstance and the events surrounding it, as a warning to them that they should be prepared for such things, and going through with them how they could report it and the kinds of things they should do to prepare to prevent such an action in the future.
What happened in San Juan is not the first time that happens in Puerto Rico. I don't know if we do have more cases like those in the rest of the nation, that you are aware. Do we have more cases like that?
Well, I'm certainly aware that we have had cases long-term, based on my Navy experience with such activities, but I would take that question for the record, ma'am, if I may, and certainly we will investigate and do what's within our authorities to make our U.S. flag fleet aware and make sure they are very vigilant in response.
Thank you, Admiral, and thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I just want to introduce for the record a statement from the President of the National Association of Waterfront Employees for this fiscal year budget request, just to be on the record, if you allow that.
Without objection.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Salute. I want to thank you and the committee for the success we had last year in this committee with the passage of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. I noticed you waved on my colleague in that process, Mr. Dusty Johnson, and I thank you for doing so. Chairman McFahey, you gave credit for the significant decline to many things. Dusty and I think it's only due to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. So you'll understand that. But like every piece of legislation, there's always more to be done. The actual legislation that passed this House was modified in the Senate, leaving out some very important elements that Mr. Johnson and I intend to try to add and into the legislative process this year. And so one of those, Chairman McFahey, has to do with your authority to actually carry out the orders that you have, that your administrative law judges are working on. Your agency seems to be the only independent agency in the entire federal government that does not have the authority to implement its decisions about unfair practices. Certainly, we can go down through the Federal Trade Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, on and on. Every one of these independent commissions has the authority to do so. However, when your team decides that somebody is acting unlawfully or contrary to the law, you've got to go to court to get an order, rather than the other way around, giving an order, and then if the party doesn't like it, they can go to court and try to overturn your order. We've received a letter from two of your commissioners, Max Vekich and Carl Betzel, asking Congress to right this wrong and to modify the Ocean Shipping Reform Act so that you actually have the authority to implement the decisions that you have. So my question to you is, do you support your other two commissioners and this effort to try to modify, improve last year's law?
Yeah, Congressman Garamendi, I do support it, and I would say that even if the two commissioners in question weren't sitting imposingly behind me.
Well, they are big men, but whatever the motivation, we appreciate your answer. Also, I note that this bill is supported. Mr. Johnson and I will carry this bill through, hopefully, success and to the President. And I also note that Mr. Johnson has some additional reforms that follow along on, I would say, some errors that the Senate made that he hopes to correct, and I look forward to the opportunity to work with him on that. I wanted also to go to the issue of the sexual assault, Admiral. That's been covered extensively by my colleagues, and I want to therefore just bring to your attention the ongoing issue that MARAD has to keep its ancient ships floating. If you'd like to comment on that and spend the next minute and 30 seconds commenting on how you intend to keep those ships and or replace them, I would appreciate that.
Yes, sir, Congressman Garamendi, thank you for that question. And I'm happy to talk about Embark, and I'm certainly happy to talk about ships. As you're aware, we are working a Ready Reserve Force recapitalization program, which involves purchasing new vessels or used vessels. In particular, used vessels. We've purchased 2 and are in the process of concluding a purchase, which we have notified Congress of, to bring in 3 more. These vessels will be coming on board later this year, and we will be working on flagging them in. As you're aware, during the 2023 NDAA, we were authorized a new build program. However, that program was not appropriated. I would offer that in the context of recapitalizing the Ready Reserve Force, It's an all-hands-on-deck evolution. The ships are aging, as you point out. Maintaining them is more costly, and buying used is very expensive as well. So every opportunity that's possible, I think we should take.
Thank you. In my remaining 25 seconds, we will be bringing to this committee what we call the National Maritime Security Program, which is a program that's built upon some of the policies we already have in place so that the Jones Act fleet, some of those ships could be militarily useful if they were modified or built in the future to be militarily useful. In that way, we might be able to provide the necessary logistical support that the Navy or the military would need should anything occur in the Pacific. So we'll get more of that to the committee in the days ahead. Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. What a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. Mr. Andrew, you recognized.
Welcome to the House Subcommittee on the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation. Today, my remarks and questions will focus on this administration's, what I believe is a dangerous rush to industrialize our oceans with offshore wind. To paint a picture for my colleagues, the proposed offshore wind project leases are over 2 million acres in size and include over 3,000 wind turbines, each over 1,000 feet height. Like we,
There we go. Do I have it now? Yep, thank you. To paint a picture for my colleagues, the proposed offshore wind project leases are over 2 million acres in size and include over 3,000 wind turbines, each over 1,000 feet tall. The straight words are, we've never seen anything like this before. Of concern to this subcommittee should be the effect of the maritime supply chain. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has determined that the impacts of wind turbines on navigation and vessel traffic will be, quote, major, and could result, quote, in personal injury or loss of life. It is obvious why these projects are dangerous. First, offshore, wind leases will obstruct major maritime traffic lanes. Thousands of vessels will be forced into tight bottlenecks. Second, offshore wind structures interfere with navigational radar. This interference affects both commercial and military vessels, as well as search and rescue helicopters. The fact is that maritime transit in offshore wind complexes will be difficult and it will be dangerous. And our supply chain will become even more fragile. Congress must shine a light on the true costs of offshore wind industrialization and hold this government accountable. I direct my questions to Rear Admiral Ann Phillips, Administrator for the United States Maritime Administration, and I thank you for your service to the United States Navy. Since 1958, the Maritime Administration has regularly published the official instruction manual on collision avoidance radar. Most recently in 2005, this matter is under your purview. Has the Maritime Administration conducted any assessments of the effect of offshore wind structures on collision avoidance radar? And if not, would you commit to investigating this phenomenon?
Thank you, Congressman Bandrew. To my knowledge, we have not conducted a specific investigation into the impacts on collision avoidance radar. I would certainly think that if there were issues related to this, that the maritime industry would have contacted me. However, I appreciate your interest in such a strong safety measure, and we will work with our fellow interagency to see what we can do.
I will just remind you that it's a little tough sometimes in the maritime industry, and they have mentioned it numerous times. You've been a vocal advocate of the offshore wind industry in your official capacity as Maritime Administrator. Before this job, and I don't mean to be tough, just questions, you worked for Birdshaw Associates, a consulting firm with connections to the wind industry going back a decade. Is that correct?
I did work for Berta Shaw probably more than a decade ago. Yes, sir.
Okay. You then served as a member of the advisory board for the Center for Climate and Security, which has received substantial funding from left-leaning political action groups and undisclosed donors. Is that correct?
It is correct that I served on the board of the Center for Climate and Security.
Okay. In your time as a civilian, did you receive compensation to consult or advise on any matters related to wind energy?
I did not.
Development, onshore or offshore?
I did not.
Okay. So let me just say to the people that are here, and I know I don't have a lot of time left either. I live on the East Coast, obviously. It's what's called the Jersey Shore. We now have along the East Coast 25 dead whales. We have dozens of dead dolphins. We've never seen anything like it. We have thousands upon tens of thousands of people now who on the coast, whether it be Florida, whether it be New Jersey, whether it be New York, do not want these wind turbines. There has been much proof that they are actually going to cost a great deal of money, that people's utility rates are going to go up, it's going to cost them more, that it's dangerous to the environment, it's dangerous to the cold pool, which is a very environmentally sensitive area. It's dangerous to all this wildlife. The fishermen are against it. It's dangerous to the fishermen, and I would maintain that it is also dangerous for the maritime industry. We're fully involved with this. We just had a hearing, actually in district. I guess it was about 10 days ago now, I'd have to check, but it was recently. We had so many people there, so many folks concerned, we couldn't even get them all in the convention center. So I would tell you that, quite frankly, you're going to hear more from me, and you're going to hear from people like Andy Biggs and a whole bunch of other folks who are real concerned about this issue. Many other congressmen have concern, and I wouldn't want this committee, which I sit on, to be in a vacuum and not realize the serious, serious concerns that there are out there, and this must be investigated. Thank you. I knew that'd make everybody quiet.
Thank you for that question. Ranking Member Larson, you're recognized for your question.
Thank you. Just to start, Admiral, is it the Biden policy position to develop offshore wind generally?
Yes, sir, it is.
Yeah, should we expect someone who's an appointed person in the Biden administration to do anything but support the Biden administration policy, and if you didn't, you'd leave? That's usually how it works.
That's an interesting question, sir, but I support
All my
policy.
questions are.
Yes, sir, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I look forward to them. Thank you, sir.
All right, great, sure. And I think everyone should expect to hear a lot of support for offshore wind as well. And so I look forward to doing that. However, this is about your budget and about FMC's budget and the Marine Debris Program. And I do have a complaint about the administration's $20 million request for the Small Shipyard Grant Program. If the administration put the fully authorized amount in the budget, based on your past experience, Amerit's past experience, would there be $30 million worth, at least $30 million worth of awards in the Small Shipyard Grant Program? In other words, is it oversubscribed?
Congressman Larson, all of our grants are oversubscribed.
I care about the Small Shipyard Grant
It is
Program.
oversubscribed.
It is
Yes.
oversubscribed, yeah. So the fact that they've put in $20 million in the budget and we authorized 30 is telling me that we have an opportunity here in Congress to fix the mistake that the Biden administration made with the budget, in my view. I want to make that point clear to the folks listening in TV land, because this is a program that helps a lot of small shipyards in my district and in my state and throughout the country. So I look forward to moving forward on that. But I want to turn to Chairman Fay about your agency's budget, about the commission's budget, that is. We've given a lot of new opportunities and responsibilities with OSRA 22. How much of that budget is going to be put into implementation of that versus your basic budget that maybe you had a backlog in technology investments, or you had a backlog in X or Y or Z. How's that split up generally?
That's a good question, and I will want to submit a written
Yeah, it'd be great.
a written answer to you, but I will say, just generally speaking, almost all of it goes to professional personnel, and all of our professional personnel are involved in implementing OSRA. There's so many different provisions, and we are learning how to walk and chew gum at the same time. We are not putting off anything while we figure out one thing. Everything is being done simultaneously. There are a couple of things that we do need to address in order to implement OSRA, but also to do other things. For instance, a lot of our IT equipment and software, frankly, is outdated. We need to freshen our website. We need to freshen our a number of those technological intersections, and also make sure that we're not vulnerable to any sort of cyber attacks, et cetera. So there is some, but by far, most of the budget goes into personnel, mostly economists and lawyers who know a lot more about the maritime industry than I want to know, but do a great job and will help us to implement OSRA and also to do our other activities.
That's great. I just will put a note in for the marine debris program since that's on the agenda, but we got the written statement in. Again, I'll just underscore how important that is. How important a program that is to the Pacific Northwest, to the Puget Sound, to the Salish Sea, and having a funded marine debris program is important for us there. And so I know that other folks have gone over time, and so I will yield back a full minute in making up my contribution to this committee. Thank you.
Representative Babin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say thank you to our witnesses. It was good to talk to you, Admiral, on our call yesterday as well. Thank you you both for being here. The U.S. maritime industry keeps our nation's economy running without question. If you doubt that for a minute, just come down to Southeast Texas, the greater Houston region. Look in my district alone. We have some great ports there, including the #1 port by tonnage in the country, Port of Houston. The Houston Ship Channel is busy day and night, a conduit for shippers to send and receive goods and services all around the world. Despite that importance, many folks, in fact, I think most of our country did not understand just how big an impact this movement of goods was. However, COVID brought new attention to this space, putting shipping issues and supply chain challenges right smack in the limelight. And even as we've heard so much about supply chain issues and the need to improve the status quo, I've heard horror stories about dealing with red tape in the maritime industry. This hurts Texas more than any other state, especially when it deals with energy export projects that are being held up. So Rear Admiral Phillips, this question is for you. Piggybacking off what Chairman Webster had alluded earlier, the Deepwater Port Act provides a statutory timeline of about a year for MARAD to process and approve or deny a deepwater port application. I understand that these projects can be complex, but MARAD is taking much longer, more than 3 years, to process many of these applications. And since 2015, MARAD has issued only 1 record of decision and 0 licenses for deepwater ports, despite the filing of 8 deepwater port applications since that time. I find that extremely disturbing, given the project proponents are spending millions of their dollars to develop these projects only to have them stalled in your agency. For example, as Chairman Webster brought up, Texas Gulf Link is in year 4 of supposedly a 1-year application process, because every time MARAD is supposed to give them an answer, they start asking duplicative questions and pushing the timelines. Even worse, this is costing Texas Gulf Link big time. They're paying millions for MARAD to just do their job. Your response to this issue is just that MARAD is scrupulously following the law. Well, asking the same types of questions over and over again because it resets the clock isn't MARAD's statutory responsibility. MARAD needs to be transparent, honest, and straightforward with private sector partners. Who at MARAD is ultimately responsible for these applications moving along in a timely fashion And what steps are they taking to ensure applications are being processed in a transparent, efficient, timely manner, and that applicants are being kept informed of what is going on with their projects? I'd like to hear that.
Thank you, Congressman Babin, for that question. I sign the records of decision. That is delegated to me by the Secretary. So I am the person at Marriott who is responsible for moving these programs along, and I accept that responsibility. I would point out that the record of decision for the Delphin project was approved in 2017. The project did not move to a license because the company was not ready to do so. We've signed the spot rod, as you know, last fall, and we anticipate moving forward with a license for that later this year. The Gulf Link project is moving forward as well, and we anticipate we can move to a record of decision with them later this year. As discussed, these are extremely complicated projects. We work very hard, and I will state again, we are transparent and we do work with the companies on what the requirements are that we need from them to move forward, and that the stop clock actually helps them provide what they need so that this process can continue and we can reach a legally defensible record of decision.
Well, I'm not sure they're very appreciative of the stop clock. And why would you have duplicative questions and asking the same questions over and over again, and then the clock starts all over? I don't have examples of the duplicative questioning, but this is something that I've heard from several of these companies.
Yes, sir, I would take that for the record. I don't know of duplicative questions, and we rely on the applicant to respond to us once questions have been asked for them and a specific issue has been provided to them.
Okay, how much time do I have left?
5 seconds.
5 seconds? Well, sorry, Mr. Mafia, I'm not going to be able to get that in 5 seconds. All right, yield back.
I appreciate the congressman not asking the question and then having the time expire.
Representative Peltola?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, good afternoon. So I'm very pleased to be on this subcommittee. Coast Guard is critical in Alaska, and so are the maritime trades and maritime transportation. We mostly fly in and out, but most of our cargo comes in by barge, so thank you for the work that you do. As the Arctic warms and as our Bering Sea, Chukchi Sea, Beaufort Sea are ice-free so often, we've seen a real dramatic increase in vessels traveling in the Arctic. And this is going to provide a lot of opportunity, but it is also providing challenges to communities and stressors that we haven't seen before. And I was just wondering if the commission and the administration could speak to how some of the things that you're looking at in this regard. Thank you.
Yeah, as far as the commission is, we monitor such, anything like the trade lanes, if trade lanes are opening up through the Arctic, but we don't have any jurisdiction over that particular area, so.
Yes, ma'am, Congresswoman, thank you for your question. We work with the Committee for the Maritime Transportation System, who does look at Arctic issues. We are a member of that. We host them actually at MARAD. They have done work in the Arctic and continue to do work on the matters surrounding Arctic matters, as well as the Coast Guard, who is definitely, as you point out, a critical player in Alaska and very much involved in safety with regard to maritime operations in the Arctic.
Maybe I could yield my time to the gentleman from Texas to ask his question.
Could you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. From last year at the same time, and certainly since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, do you foresee supply chain congestion returning to U.S. ports in 2023, or in the next 5 to 10 years, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but without further amendments to the Shipping Act?
I think that the cargo flows are extraordinarily difficult to predict. I wish I could give you a better answer to this question, but what I will say is that what we've learned both with COVID, initially, by the way, a lot of people in the industry thought COVID would, mean exactly that, very little shipping, right? And then it was this boom of everybody staying at home and having nothing to do and shopping and whatever that created this extreme opposite situation. Now we have a situation where things have fallen far faster than anybody in the industry predicted. So whether it could return in 2023, I'm not sure. I would say that the odds are against it but that said though, because of the economy and other things like that, but I would not underestimate the possibility that American consumers could yet decide that all this stuff in warehouses, the extra stuff that you've read has gotten stuck in warehouses and that sort of thing, they won't want that. They want the latest thing. And so I think we need to be ready for another boom. Now, will it be the kind of boom that in demand that we saw under COVID? No, I doubt it would be that high, but we need to be ready. So for instance, the reason why we need to get the export rule in place, the reason why we need to get the detention demurrage rules in place are not necessarily for this moment, but they are for the next crisis. We are in the calm after the storm, but also the calm before the storm, in my view.
Thank you, and I appreciate the gentlewoman's yielding. Am I completely out of time? How much time do I have left? A minute and 36. I got one more then, okay. As FMC Commissioner, you are no doubt familiar with the incentive principle, which essentially states that demurrage and detention practices are reasonable under the Shipping Act only if they incentivize cargo flow. In applying the incentive principle, do you agree that the FMC must avoid actions that would disincentivize the flow of cargo? And for example, by allowing shippers to further delay container retrieval past free time?
Yes, the incentive principle, Rebecca Dye came up with after a lot of consultations within the industry. She was in the middle of a fact-finding. And it is difficult because the particulars do matter here. But yes, the idea is to make sure that detention demurrage does exist, right? This is, we were asked, well, why don't you just suspend it, et cetera, when there's so much unfairness going on. And the truth is we can't, if we suspended it, it would all be worse. There'd be even more. Legitimate detention and demurrage is very, very important to keep cargo flowing. But it must be follow that incentive principle, meaning that if you can't, if a shipper can't pick up their cargo because an importer or exporter can't pick up their cargo because the terminal is closed, there's a blizzard, or they're just, maybe even they're just closed on the weekend and they can't pick it up that day, they shouldn't be charged for that particular day. And if they can, then they should be. So there's a lot packed in that, and I'd like to maybe have a further conversation with you. But yes, I do believe in the incentive principle. It's absolutely essential, and that it is what OSRA is all about, is adding the leaves on that tree.
Good, thank you, and I see that my time is out, so yield back.
Okay, so where were we? Yes. Mr. Ezel.
Ezel.
It's like we're all having a little trouble with this button today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's Ezel, one word.
I'll never miss it again.
I've been working on that, so thank you all for this afternoon and being a part of this committee. Mr. Maffei, when I'm talking to the ports in my district, I hear how port property used for marine terminal operations is pretty limited across the country. And I think this, of course, contributes to port congestion. Can you expand on the importance of picking up shipping containers in a timely manner?
Yeah, it's absolutely essential to keep cargo moving. The presumption of your question is absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. Most of the ports in this country are near or in urban areas, of course, right? That's where the business is. And because of that, it is very difficult to get new property, as we saw, particularly in the LA Long Beach area during COVID. So it is very, very important that people pick up their containers on time, that they drop them off. One of the things was upsetting is these reports of large, huge customers like the big box stores or whatever getting 3 or 4 weeks of free time. There is some evidence of that. Mostly that's not the case, but if you have excessive free time, it does create those bottlenecks. So all of that is very important. It's also important to make sure that empties can be picked up. And one of the things that we're being careful about in terms of our refusal to deal rule is to make sure that we don't create the unintended consequence of all these empties being left. So you're totally onto something. I will say, though, that it does also exemplify how much the ocean supply chain is dependent on the rest of the supply chain. If we had more warehouse space, if we had better roads, better highways, if you build a bridge in Middle America, it helps me. So we can't just look at the ports, but it's a very good point, sir.
Thank you. Recent reports have shown the container volumes at most U.S. ports have fallen, as we've talked about in the last year, and certainly has lowered since the height of the COVID and related consumer spending, which you mentioned in your testimony. When considering these facts, do you think more amendments to the Shipping Act are needed to prevent supply chain congestion in the U.S. ports, or should we let markets adjust? And can we talk about what FMC is doing to provide certainty to exporters during the implementation of the Act?
I'll answer the second part of that question first. The certainty to exporters, I mean, we're just trying to make everything we do completely transparent. We are in close touch with a number of the exporter groups, particularly the largest ag groups. And, you know, there's some disadvantages to being a 5-appointee commission. There are a lot of advantages, and one of those advantages is all of us, one way or another, have hit the road and gone out and spoken to a lot of these groups in various, and if the group is meeting in your district, we're happy to come there too, because it's very important. It's a huge industry, affects everything, but it's actually in some ways a very small industry. So we've been trying to do that as much as we can. In terms of additional amendments, I mean, I feel a little bit like my daughter does. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and she eats a bowl of Cheerios every night before bed. But I'm trying to get her to bed, right? So she's halfway through the bowl of Cheerios. I'm like, well, what else do you want? What other snack do you want? We're still eating the Cheerios in the first act. It doesn't mean that we might not need something further. There's a lot of stuff, there's certain court decisions that might come down, there's certain other kinds of things, but it does make it such that I think my biggest focus is to implement what you've already passed, sir.
Very good. So it's fair to say that you agree the FMC must avoid actions that would disincentivize the flow of cargo.
Absolutely, that's the trick, right?
Yeah.
Figuring out what those actions are.
Well, I'll tell you, in Mississippi, in the Port of Gulfport, we've got real good roads that go right to I-10. So if the Port of Houston gets too backed up, we got plenty of room over there in Gulfport.
I was at the Port of Gulf.
Right.
I was at the Port of Gulfport just before just before the pandemic, and you're quite right. Our Gulf ports, by the way, a lot more traffic is coming to them. Some of that, there's speculation, it's the labor issues on the West Coast. I think that may be a small part of it, but a lot of that traffic is going to stay because of improvements that the Gulf ports have made, improvements in the Panama Canal, and frankly, the change in where the cargo is coming from, more cargo coming from Southeast Asia and India.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Representative Skolton.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chairman Webster. Thank you, Rear Admiral Phillips. And thank you, Mr. Maffei, for your incredible testimony today and answering our questions. This question is for Rear Admiral Phillips. If we can turn back to Embark briefly for a moment, and I want to thank you for your, again, your extensive testimony on this already and answering all of our questions. But there's a specific portion that I wanted to ask about. Embark included both near and long-term requirements on shipping companies. And we have some information about some of the near-term requirements, the short-term requirements, but how are those companies complying with some of the longer-term requirements like video surveillance and master key controls and the like?
Congressman Schulten, thank you for that question. As you pointed out, there are things that it will take companies some time to move forward with. The specific items that you mentioned, key control, cameras, and other security matters are now also in the Coast Guard Authorization Act from 2023, and Coast Guard will be developing processes for them, and there is a time frame under which those actions must be implemented, so that companies do have some time to implement these. They were a part of MBARC, and we are seeing companies take action on their own now, which I find heartening. I should also note that we have a rulemaking required under the NDAA for MBARC, which we are proceeding with expeditiously. That will not impact things under the Coast Guard Act, but it will help us put our processes in place for MBARC more thoroughly so that companies can follow those as we move forward, in particular as regard to any actions we might take to withhold payments should companies not be in compliance.
Just as a follow-up, in terms of the time requirements for complying, do you think they're sufficient to give the companies enough time to fully comply, but also timely enough to ensure that they're taking appropriate and prompt action?
Thank you, ma'am. I think they are appropriate to the circumstances, and again, we are seeing companies move out in advance of that, so with optimism, they won't need the full amount of time to move forward. And we thank them, I would say, for their actions in response to this.
That's wonderful. That is heartening to hear. Thank you so much. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Representative Johnson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and it's been gratifying to hear so many good words said about the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. And one of the surprising things that happens to all of us when we get to Congress is that we realize that there are actually good members here, that not everybody is sort of a cartoonish villain. And I discovered one such good person in John Garamendi, who's just been an incredible partner. You know, the House works a lot harder than the Senate. Nobody doubts that, of course. But, you know, we passed the Ocean Shipping Reform Act out not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. And as John mentioned, we don't think we're quite done yet, and I appreciate that Chairman Maffei, by the way, I've heard 5 different pronunciations of your last name today.
When I was in your body, the Congress, I used to say it rhymes with buffet.
Yes, well, that's helpful.
Anything
Actually
you want
helpful.
for $9.95.
And I understand that you are, as you're saying, busy eating Cheerios, but I think Mr. Garamendi and I think you could probably use another bowl on deck for when you get done eating the first bowl. And so next week we'll be introducing the Ocean Shipping Reform Act 2.0. I think, as John mentioned, undo some of the damage the Senate did with their revisions, and I think we'll do a better job of hitting the center of the target. But getting to OSRA 1.0, Mr. Chairman, one of the things we did is provide you the power to promulgate rules around this refusal to deal. You've talked a bit about that. And I know we had 120 members of Congress weigh in, and then you had an additional, notice of proposed rulemaking and solicited comments. Do we have a timeline? Do we have a sense of when you're going to be done?
Yes. Because of so many valuable comments when we did the first notice of proposed rulemaking, we are making significant enough changes that we want to do a supplemental. It just wouldn't be right to just go to final rule without having a comment period so the public could comment on what we're coming up with. I expect that supplemental to be out very soon. Let's say, I'm trying to think. I don't want to promise next week, but I'll say in the next month. We're working very hard on that.
So I heard next week. Just
yeah, right.
Everybody heard next week.
So yes, we're working on that. It's very important. I will say this: the wonderful thing, the good thing about the current environment is that we aren't experiencing these problems to the same degree that we were in the midst of COVID. So when you wrote, do this really, really fast. Every hour practically was of the essence. It is less that now, and it is so important that we do get it right, because as many of your colleagues have pointed out, there could be unintended consequences on these very exporters that we're trying to help if we don't get this right.
Well, and I would note that I've had a number of these foreign flag ocean carriers admit to me in my office that because they know the cop on the beat has new tools available at their disposal, maybe not perfectly well defined yet, but getting close, they've, of course, changed the way they do
do business, and that is to the benefit of American exporters for sure. So I want to shift to the vessel operating, the common carrier audit system that you all have. And for those of you who don't know, this collects detention and demurrage billing information for the 9 large foreign flagged ocean carriers. And you had mentioned in your testimony, sir, that this is really valuable information. Clearly, I know that you're not going to have, company-specific audit findings released to Congress. There would be all kinds of business information why that might not be appropriate. But do you think summaries of your findings could be beneficial for lawmakers?
I think potentially. First of all, we are happy, of course, to give any lawmaker a detailed briefing on various things. There are some requirements of OSRA, for instance, that we haven't implemented yet. We haven't gotten to that deadline yet, but in terms of reporting overall import and export volumes, that we certainly will do. There are probably other areas that could be useful both to Congress and the public, and happy to look into that. I think these audits, which actually, I established when I became chairman because it was so important that we, I mean, these are foreign carriers, but we do want to communicate to them what the best practices are. We want to give them some opportunity to follow our detention demurrage rules, to make sure they have measures in place to avoid unfair retaliation against an exporter or importer who maybe brings a case against them, to make sure that they do have a vibrant export program. So that's what it's for. But yeah, I'm happy to get together with you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time. I will close by noting that the bowl of Cheerios Congress gave your team to devour was enormous. And I want to thank every single employee of the Federal Maritime Commission for the incredible work you all are doing.
That is very kind of you, Congressman, particularly because, as you know so well, it's really the staff that the biggest burden lands on. So thank you for thanking them.
Yield back.
Representative Auchincloss.
Thank you, Chairman. Rear Admiral, I appreciate you being here again with us. I'd like to ask you about offshore wind. Over 25 different types of vessels will be needed to build each offshore wind farm. To help build these vessels, on June 21st, 2022, MARAD designated offshore wind vessels under the Federal Ship Financing Program, also known as Title 11, as vessels of national interest. Since that designation, has MARAD seen an increase in Title 11 applications? And do you know how many more than previously?
We have seen an increase in Title 11 applications. We have 7 applications pending now. We anticipate more, and 5 of those 7 are for offshore wind vessels.
Do you know what kind of vessels?
All kinds, small to large,
Yeah.
everything, including rockfall vessels and other things.
Do you agree that we need further investment in U.S. offshore wind vessels to meet President Biden's goal of deploying 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030? And would you be willing to work with my office on that effort?
Thank you for that question, sir. We certainly agree that we would absolutely be willing to work with your office, and additional investment is always welcome in the maritime industry to grow the industry and grow jobs and certainly jobs in the maritime workforce.
Yeah, and I'll note that the Title 11 program has not received appropriations since FY 2018 and has only been funded by Congress twice in the last decade. I believe it should receive increased appropriations to help build the hundreds of vessels needed for the new American offshore wind industry. And I will move on, but continue questioning you, Rear Admiral, about the mariner shortage. When you testified before the committee on September 14th, 2022, you stated that vessel operators report that mariner availability is still a challenging issue, and that you were hosting a summit on September 23rd to discuss recruitment and retention challenges for mariners. As you know, one of the issues impeding mariner retention is the antiquated merchant mariner credentialing system. Section 11511 of the FY23 NDAA requested a report by the USCG Commandant in consultation with the Maritime Administration on modernizing the merchant mariner credentialing system. That was due 2 years after the passage of that law. How is MARAD helping modernize the merchant mariner credentialing process, and have you started to work on this study?
So thank you for that question, sir. The credentialing system belongs entirely to the Coast Guard. We work closely with them on this particular matter, and the challenge for them, of course, is the system was built to manage credentials and not to be searchable. So what would be helpful to us is a database that the Coast, and to the Coast Guard as well, where we could search and to understand how many qualified mariners we have and what qualifications they actually hold. It is not possible to ascertain that querying their database right now. Much of it's on paper.
Well, this is why we asked the USCG to consult with you as they were doing it. Have they been consultative?
We are working with them on this issue. It's a very common topic of discussion with the Coast Guard. And I would add that they are working very hard to solve this issue and come to a resolution.
Do you have confidence that they'll be able to issue this report on time?
Congressman Auchincloss, I can't speak to the report. I know that they understand the need.
Got it. I'll actually yield back the rest of my time, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we have maybe another round here with Representative Garamendi. You know what? Okay.
Done. There you go.
Are there any, well, everybody's left. There's
I can't ask questions.
nobody can ask questions, so that's it. Seeing none, that concludes our hearing today, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for their testimony. It was really appreciated. Thanks for listening. I ask unanimous consent for the record. Today's hearing remain open until such time as witnesses have time to provide answers to questions that may be submitted to them in writing without objection. Show that ordered. I also wanted to ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments or information submitted by the members or witnesses to be included in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The subcommittee stands adjourned.